Mom's enthusiastic about new study, but it's just rearranging deck chairs. And Mama found not guilty of criminal charges. A new UK study is getting an especially enthusiastic response from mothers internationally. There are thousands of reactions, shares, and comments on social media singing its praises. However, it is really just more rearranging of deck chairs on the Titanic, while mothers continue to drown. Unfortunately, it misleads mothers and the public, and deflects from the true cause of the custody crisis and an effective solution. Everyday business, addressing domestic abuse and continuing harm through a family court review is the study. It was conducted by two experienced law professors. 300 custody cases were analyzed, and survivors, judges, and court staff were interviewed. There are two MSM articles reporting on the study that mothers are sharing widely. Family Court's failure to tackle domestic abuse laid out in damning new report. Dismissiveness towards victims, ignorance around abuse, and pervasive pro-contact culture found to be putting children at risk, published by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. And majority of family court cases in England and Wales feature domestic abuse. Watchdog says, Commissioner's review found 87% of cases uncovered physical, psychological, or sexual abuse of a family member, published by The Guardian. Much of the celebrating has been around the new data that upped the percentage of custody cases that involve domestic abuse from about 70% to nearly 90%. While that is likely more accurate, this further deflects from the true cause of the crisis being a disparity of power between men and women in family court, rather than a domestic abuse issue. This study is a follow-up to a previous investigation 5 years ago by the same folks called the Harm Report. That one got tremendous traction as well, and women's hopes skyrocketed, thinking surely it would make a difference. Yet the authors admit nothing has changed since then. To be fair, nothing has changed after any of the countless studies and investigations conducted over the decades by any authoritative body, including legal and mental health academia and legislative and judicial entities. We do not need more studies. What we need is action. More on that later. But first, let's pick apart this study. Since the TBIJ article is written by a journalist whose beat is exclusively family court, we'll pick that one apart. The Guardian article is quite similar. The title: Family Court's Failure to Tackle Domestic Abuse Laid Out in Damning New Report, suggests the main problem in family court is judges failing to deal with or take domestic abuse cases seriously. First, right out of the gate, there is the faulty assumption that the crisis is solely a domestic abuse issue, when the truth is women are losing custody whether abuse is reported or not. Additionally, domestic abuse is used gender neutrally, the entire article. There is nary a mention of the word women when it is almost exclusively women as a class who are the victims in custody cases. As for the term failure, judges are not really failing to deal with or take domestic abuse victims seriously, as succeeding in the agenda to empower men to continue abuse after divorce. The subtitle: Dismissiveness towards victims, ignorance around abuse, and pervasive pro-contact culture found to be putting children at risk, encapsulates the author's three main explanations for the crisis: dismissiveness towards victims. Judges are not just dismissing victims, they are deliberately disregarding evidence of abuse by fathers and discrediting mothers. Ignorance about abuse. Judges are not ignorant. They know exactly what they are doing, entitling men and oppressing women. Saying it is ignorance gives judges a pass when what they are doing is purposeful. A pro-contact culture. This is the new favorite gender-neutral soundbite to explain why judges are giving kids to abusers. Judges do not prioritize contact with both parents, as claimed. The truth is, judges only routinely prioritize contact with abusive fathers, not abusive mothers. An aside, there is never a mention in any study of the difference between the quality of contact with a mother and father. It is much more important for children to be in contact with their primary attachment figure, their mother, than any secondary attachment figure, including the father. The OBN, Old Boy Network, is intent on disappearing this sex-specific reality and any other gendered factor that favors mothers maintaining custody. And that is just the title and subtitle. The misinforming continues. Supporting the pro-contact mantra, The researchers found that judges gave custody to a potentially unsafe parent in more than half of the hundreds of cases reviewed. First, that sounds quite low, considering we rarely hear about children being protected through restricting credibly accused abusive fathers to supervised visits or no contact. On the other hand, judges consistently restrict mothers who have not been credibly accused of abuse to supervised contact. And again, it is not unsafe parents that is the problem. It is unsafe fathers. The Domestic Abuse Commissioner who initiated the study says the reforms these researchers suggested 5 years ago are urgently needed to protect vulnerable parents and children. But the reforms they suggested would be ineffective anyway. Been there, done that. Also, it is not vulnerable parents who are being routinely victimized by judges. It is vulnerable mothers. The commissioner consigns blame to judges having antiquated views about domestic violence. While that may be true for some judges, it certainly is not causing the epidemic of them disregarding and concealing of evidence unfavorable to men. And it gives judges a pass, along the same lines as saying they are simply ignorant and need training. Another factor blamed for the crisis is the lack of free or affordable legal representation. However, this does not take into consideration that even when mothers have the best lawyers, they still lose custody. It is not a matter if she has a lawyer at all. Another common culprit identified, coercive control, is said to be dismissed or misunderstood. Although coercive control is undeniably terrible, judges are blatantly ignoring physical and sexual abuse. What makes anyone think that if judges understand coercive control, they will protect children? And of course, parental alienation has to rear its ugly head in every investigation. But this study confirms what we've predicted all along. Judges are now using different terms. Since all the hoopla over banning PA, only 4% of cases involve judges using it. All that campaigning to ban it for naught. The study has a name for these alternate PA terms, implicit allegations. However, judges are also using other things that are not implicitly PA as well to strip moms of custody. And judges are not just alleging it, they are falsely finding mothers guilty of it. This is the common denominator. Judges are lying about mothers, using any of a plethora of terms and concepts in order to justify switching custody to fathers. Conversely, judges are also lying about abusive and self-serving fathers being safe and in children's best interests to have joint or sole custody. The next excuse named in the study is delays. The cases are taking too long, and the usual lack of resources leading to throwing more good money after bad. The solution proposed in this study is to incorporate alternative pathfinder courts. They are claiming these will overcome the barriers of adversarialism and silo working. However, since these factors are not the cause of the crisis, they will likely make little or no difference, and they may make things worse, if that is even possible. Takeaways. There is a potpourri of explanations set forth in this study as to why the crisis is occurring. It's all the usual suspects and more. Judges not taking domestic violence seriously, dismissiveness towards victims, a pro-contact culture, not prioritizing child safety, ignorant judges, parental alienation, the adversarial system, case delays, lack of resources, etc. The biggest takeaway, though, is the glaring omission of gender in this study, and in the articles reporting on it. There is no breakdown of investigated variables by sex. They speak about gender-neutral victims, abusers, parents, families, litigants, and domestic abuse in general throughout. Talk about a failure. That is a huge one. The DV movement has been infiltrated by men's groups claiming women are abusing men as much or more. So just talking about domestic abuse without clearly stating that in custody cases, it is almost exclusively women who are the victims of both their exes and of judges is negligence, or, more likely, cowardice. Professionals in the upper echelon of academia and government probably do not want to upset the status quo, nor do MSM journalists. In other words, the study completely misses the point. The custody crisis is not only gendered, it is due to pervasive, systemic male entitlement and oppression of women. Beating around the domestic abuse bush is diverting from that fact and misleading mothers and the public. See our column, Down the Domestic Abuse Rabbit Hole, for more on that. Studies and investigations have not, in the last decades, and will not in the future, ever get to the point. For one, there is no way to collect data or quantify that judges are lying about women. It's a he said, she said, or rather a judge said, she said dynamic, in which the judges always win because they have all the power and mothers none. In our last column, we profiled a mother who'd gotten the Arizona legislature to do an investigation into family court. Judge retaliates, takes out restraining order against mom. That was indeed validating for her and other mothers, but it will make no difference because piecemeal reforms within the family court system not help. New waves of traumatized mothers enter the family court arena each year and are hit with a tsunami of misinformation by Dalla's domestic abuse and legal advocates. By the time moms figure out they have been misled, their children have aged out. No, we do not need any more studies or investigations by the academia, legislatures, judiciary, or others. What we need is action. Women must unite in large numbers and demand a new system. Join the Women's Coalition, where we are getting the truth out and gathering troops to fight for a new system. And sisters in solidarity, if you want to engage in activism to end the crisis at womenscoalition.org. In other news, a victory. One of our sisters in solidarity was found not guilty of 3 criminal charges this week in Massachusetts. She should never have been prosecuted. The DA was likely collaborating with the family court judges. The jury believed her. Juries should be every mother's right in custody cases. It is worse for a mother to lose her children, sometimes forever, than her freedom temporarily. This relieved mama is now able to visit with her children, but only virtually. Hopefully, that will increase to unsupervised visits in the near future since she was found not guilty. Congrats, mama! And that's it for this episode of Custody Crisis Stories. Before you go, please like, comment, and share to help us get the word out. See you next week.